After the longest development cycle of any Call of Duty game and a very up and down past couple of months, Black Ops 6 is finally out, and now the question is it good? It's only been a couple weeks, so there is some recency bias talking, but right now, for me, from both a campaign and zombies perspective, my answer is unequivocally yes. Black Ops 6 Zombies is simultaneously exactly what they promised it would be, but it also goes way beyond anything we could have expected based on those promises. After the first couple of weeks and 4 in-game days spent playing already, I wanted to give my first impressions, what I think it did well, and I do have a couple of concerns for the future. We knew going in that this was going to be them refining the vision they had for Cold War. They were very honest about that. That vision has a lot of negative connotations for a lot of people, and me included. I wasn't a fan of a lot of what that game did, so let me clarify. Cold War was a pretty radical shift to a new philosophy living behind the gameplay. In that philosophy, there was a lot of stuff that made sense in theory, but because of that game's development cycle being so rushed, a lot of it came across half-baked. Our first introduction to these big new ideas was with a flawed version of them. So it's easy to have the knee-jerk reaction of thinking that it's the ideas themselves that are bad. But now, they had the chance to go back and refine those concepts and tune all the systems the way they actually wanted. And it turns out, when it's done right, I actually do love this new gameplay loop. It's challenging, it has depth to it, it's replayable, and it's just genuinely fun to play. I think the easiest way to explain the new philosophy is by looking at how maps are laid out. In the old games, spaces were constructed with choke points in mind. They were made up of 95% tight hallways where you had to zigzag around obstacles, and as a player, both your movement and gameplay options were very limited. A single zombie could be a game-ending threat if it body blocked you in one of those choke points, so it was a much more methodical game where you had to carefully plan every single movement so you never got yourself into a bad situation. The zombies' movement is predictable, and therefore, so is yours. There's a right way to train them, and so you're planning it out and then executing it over and over again. In Black Ops 6, that all gets flipped completely upside down. There's way more open space, and when there are obstacles, you can usually just mantle right over them. Then the collision boxes on the enemies themselves are super tight, so you can sneak around and slide between them pretty freely, and a single zombie can't stop you from going where you want to go anymore. Instead, the threat is way closer to the more classic genre fantasy that you usually see in zombie media, where you're getting overwhelmed by this impossible number of bodies coming at you from every direction. The danger isn't being body blocked and chipped away at by a single zombie, it's being surrounded and devoured by an entire horde. Where in the past, there was a cap of 24 enemies on the map at a time, here there can be over 50, and their spawn patterns and movement are way more unpredictable, so it feels like this constant, never-ending onslaught from all angles. With the enemies being so much more unpredictable, you have to be the same way. You can't make those neat and tidy trains anymore, and you almost never feel in control of a single engagement. Where the old games were methodical, Black Ops 6 is much more improvisational. You have a bunch more tools available to you, so on the fly, you're just reacting in the moment with whatever you happen to have at that time. You can Aether Shroud yourself out of a corner 1 second and then throw a Molotov on a Mangler while you're invisible, and then pop a Free Fire Gobblegum and toss a decoy so you can get some uninterrupted shots in on an Amalgam, and then finally, as the horde closes back in, you can jump backwards and dive over a railing. You feel like an action hero with this big toolkit where you're straining all your resources and using everything at your disposal to just barely survive. It is very early in the life cycle, so at some point a meta probably will evolve, but right now it's this awesome free-flowing sandbox where you're just taking the game as it comes. Now, what I know I would be worried about hearing all that is that if you don't have to put as much thought into every little action, then has the whole game turned into this mindless, turn your brain off, lowest common denominator shooter where you don't have to think at all? That is the risk of not doing this right, and I think it's where Cold War did fail. But here, they nailed it. They offloaded that intentionality from the microscale moments so that what could be engaging second to second was just the fun, raw gameplay. But to balance it out, you have to do way more planning and put way more thought into the macro side. Moments where you have to make a decision are how developers make a game interesting and how you make the player feel invested. That's why I've always been a fan of limiting the amount of perks you can get in zombies. In theory, it might seem like more fun things should translate to more fun, but when you can get to that exact same overpowered state in every game, it doesn't feel special when it happens. It's a gimmick, it's fun for a second, but there's nothing to latch onto there. You don't feel like an active participant in the process. Black Ops 6 is nothing but decisions, and it all stems from the still a bit controversial new point system. I talk about all the reasons points were changed for about 12 minutes straight in my Black Ops 4 retrospective, coming soon, TM, so I won't get all the way into it again here, but the important thing right now is that it allows the developers to have a much better idea of how many points players will have at a specific round or at a given stage of the game. There's not this massive potential range where one person could have gotten multiple perks and double packed already, while another one who's killed the same amount of zombies still only just bought Jug and is still running a wall weapon. Now, I don't disagree that when you're that first person, it does feel good, when your hard work pays off. There are pros and cons to both systems. The benefit here is exactly that. It's the fact that you can't get ahead of the curve, and so you have to engage with the system as intended, and you have to make those tough decisions. And the developers take full advantage of that. Black Ops 6 absolutely starves you for points. You never have a surplus, and so you have to carefully consider every single purchase. The zombies are tough and guns fall off quick, so by the time you can afford to pack a punch to the next tier, that's right about the time when you really should. Any perk you buy is a setback that puts you behind the curve, so it's a big decision to get one. You have to be 100% sure that they have enough impact on your game to be worth making your raw firepower worse. And the good news is, most of them actually do have that impact, so it really is a meaningful choice with good and bad on both sides. And then they throw even more fuel on the fire with armor also costing points now, so everything in the game is competing for that one very limited resource. I'm still not 100% convinced on armor just as a system, especially in this game with how much projectile and chip damage you're taking. It feels like even more of a Sisyphean, never-ending task than ever before. But taking it at face value, because it is in the game whether I like it or not, the way it adds value by making you choose between offense and defense during setup is the best way to do it. If you think you can handle it, you can hold off on getting tier 2 armor and upgrade your gun early instead, or get an extra perk. So with the points change, this is where you're getting those opportunities to be rewarded for skill and game knowledge. The one way to alleviate some of that points pressure was by using salvage to increase your weapon damage instead. You can push your pack-a-punch needs back a bit if you get a higher rarity weapon instead, either out of the box or off the wall, or by upgrading what you have at the arsenal. But again, there are trade-offs. Salvage is the currency you use to buy equipment, but more importantly, self-revives. To talk about an alternative system for increasing damage for a second, the removal of Double Tap 2.0 is another thing that I talk about extensively in that Black Ops 4 retrospective. Spoilers, but I support it, and it's for two main reasons. The first one is that it's a little messy to have two totally separate systems that end up doing the same thing at the end of the day. It's cleaner and it's more readable when if you want to know how much damage your gun is doing, you just check the pack-a-punch level, end of story. And two, it was just such a no-brainer. You could pay 5,000 points to double your damage with a single gun that you might not even stick with, or you could pay less than half of that and get that ability for every single gun you ever used for the rest of the game. There's nothing interesting going on there. It's cheap and it's objectively incredible. The first problem, honestly, Black Ops 6 probably makes worse. If someone asked you right now, gun to your head, are you 100% confident you know if it's better to have a blue pack 2 versus a gold pack 1? But because this game keeps you so much more resource poor than Cold War did, the way that this adds that alternate upgrade path is a really cool solution to the second problem. Like armor, I do still have some reservations about salvage as an overarching system, but the way that it adds those opportunities for expression and player choice in that very punishing setup process that needs to have those options is a big step in the right direction. And before getting into the negatives, there is one more thing that I did like that I really wanted to talk about. I think all of the changes they made to the trial system are absolutely incredible. The way the machine itself moves around the map is perfect, because in Cold War, it had the GTA problem, where you have to go to an arbitrary location to start the mission, and then leave and take more time to go somewhere else that's where you're actually supposed to be. The SAM trials feel snappy with how they still get you moving around the map, but without any of the fluff. You just go to the location, and then you're immediately doing the fun stuff. And they were also refined in a bunch of ways to make them the test of skill and execution that they're actually supposed to be, and a lot of the ways to game the system were cut out. It'll give you any perk or kill streak or trap you need for free, so it's not just a matter of how many points you happen to have when you see the challenge come up. Most of them will spawn in a consistent stream of enemies, so you can't just cheese a holdout by holding a single zombie. And, my favorite, they aren't cumulative anymore. If you want that legendary reward, you have to actually earn it by doing well on that single trial. You can't get it passively by doing just okay 10 different times. So the game is fun. I'm enjoying it, and I'm excited to see how they build on this new gameplay loop over the year. But that's not to say that it's perfect, because there are still a couple things I'm worried about. The big one that I think permeates the entire experience has to do with the amount of projectiles. From manglers, yeah, but honestly more noticeably from the parasites. I'm not against projectiles as a concept in zombies, and it's not even about the amount that they actually do, because it's tiny chip damage. The problem is how that interacts with the health regen. Because of those massive horde sizes, the gameplay is this constant state of flux between taking a bunch of hits and then clearing some space around you and getting just enough breathing room to recover before it all starts again. It's not a big window and you have to take advantage of it, but if you take even a single hit point of damage from a stray parasite you didn't even see, it fully resets your regen timer. You can end up not recovering any health before the next wave starts and have to do that one completely flawlessly, when really this game expects you to be at that 250 HP so they can hit you with those more superficial hits and you can feel the intensity without actually being in real danger. Quick revive with the faster regen feels like an absolute necessity, and even with it still feels slow sometimes. So it's just something I'm watching for future maps and any new special enemy types they introduce to see if they're gonna have this same problem. Then, the other thing I'm worried about is the story. I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic and I don't already think it's bad, but I do think that the writers have to be really careful if they want to pull off what they're setting up. I've always argued that Tog der Toten should have been a more final ending to the Ether story, and Cold War should have started something truly new. So I was never a fan of Sam coming back as a main character, powered up by the Ether, fighting against an antagonistic Richtofen, because it felt like we'd been seeing that same story since 2009. Now they're adding the Chaos story into the mix too, and again, that's a narrative that I liked in its original context, and I am sad that it never got a chance to fully play out. But right now, this big melting pot of all the narratives grafted together is leaning dangerously close to late-stage MCU cameo bait, where they're just saying names of things people know instead of focusing on telling a cohesive story. I'm not giving up on it yet because it is possible that they can pull it all together, but it's a big swing and they have to do it right. And worst case scenario, if the narrative falls apart but the Chaos connection is enough to get us to some more fantastical locations instead of the grounded militarism of the Dark Ether story so far, then that is a plus. Cold War was a blueprint for a very different style of gameplay than we were used to. But it's important to call out that that concept of a very fundamental overhaul of a lot of the zombies' systems was not a new idea. It's not something that Kevin Drew came up with on his own that Jason Blundell never would have done, and it's also not something that only happened because of Warzone. It's one more thing I talk about in that Black Ops 4 retrospective, but for now, suffice to say, as early as 2016, the team had already realized that the zombies formula had some underlying design issues that were impeding its evolution, and before any of that stuff happened, they were already playing around with some of those systems and starting to make those changes. It didn't all mesh together on the first attempt, but Black Ops 6 proves that Cold War's ideas can work. I don't know exactly what to call it, but this new, streamlined, improvisational gameplay style absolutely shines here now that all the systems are actually tuned for it, and I 100% recommend it.